somewhere over the Middle East, a routine satellite passes over the Red Sea, and then something happens that no algorithm, no operator, no analyst has ever been trained to process. The water moves, not in the way water is supposed to move, not with tides, not with storms, not with any force that science has ever cataloged. It moves sideways. It pulls apart. A vast, ancient body of water separates down the center like a page being torn in half. Within 4 minutes, the images reach a ground station. Within 7, they are flagged. Within 12, they are on every government screen in the world. And within 1 hour, the most watched live stream in the history of the internet is a live feed from a shoreline somewhere in the desert showing something no human alive has ever seen. A path through the sea, dry ground where ocean used to be. People standing at the edge, holding their phones up, not speaking, just staring. This is what it would look like. This is what it once was. Picture the moment it begins. The surface of the sea does not simply part. It convulses. Something beneath the water shifts, a pressure, a presence, and the surface responds like a living thing. First a ripple moving outward in both directions from a central line, then a tremble, then a sound. Witnesses would later describe it as a deep bass vibration felt in the chest before it was heard by the ear. Then the water rises, not in a wave, not in a surge, but in walls. Slowly, impossibly, 2 massive columns of water pull away from the center and climb upward. The sea floor becomes visible, dark, wet sand, ancient silt. Creatures from the deep, scattered and exposed, the smell of the ocean floor never before touched by open air, rising into the desert heat, and between those 2 walls of water, a path, wide enough for a nation to walk through, wide enough for thousands walking side by side. The ground between is not mud, it is firm, it is solid. It is as if the earth itself has been prepared for what is about to happen. Today, the helicopters would already be circling overhead. The news cameras would be feeding live. Scientists would be on the phone with each other, their voices breaking, unable to find language for what they were seeing. Every university, every research institution, every government with satellites and sensors would be trained on a single point of ocean, and the world would hold its breath. Within the first hour, every major news network would abandon its scheduled programming. The United Nations Security Council would convene an emergency session, not because anyone understood what was happening, but because no one did. Scientists would be careful, cautious, methodical in their public statements. They would speak of anomalies, of geophysical irregularities, of the need for more data. But in their private messages, in their lab group chats, in the calls between colleagues who have spent their careers studying oceans and tides, there would be silence, and then the same sentence, repeated in 100 different languages. We have no explanation for this. Governments would scramble. Military assets would be repositioned, not out of aggression, but out of uncertainty. Because an event like this does not fit into any threat model, any contingency plan, any playbook that has ever been written. Social media would become a single global conversation. Within 6 hours, every trending topic on every platform would be the same event. The footage, shaky phone video, high-resolution satellite stills, helicopter footage showing 2 towering walls of blue water standing apart like something out of a dream, would be viewed 4 billion times before the day was over. People would be kneeling in the streets. People would be laughing out of pure disbelief. People would be calling their families, not to share news, but just to hear a familiar voice. Because in a world that believes it has seen everything, cataloged everything, explained everything, the sea has just opened, and no one has a word for what comes next. But this story is not new. It is older than any satellite, older than any government, older than the nation that would build its identity on its memory. The book of Exodus records one of the most dramatic sequences of events in all of Scripture, and at the center of that sequence is a moment that has never lost its power in 3,000 years of human history. To understand what happened at the sea, you need to understand what came before it. The Israelites had been enslaved in Egypt for 400 years, not a generation, 400 years, an entire civilization built on the labor of a people who were not free, who could not leave, who had been born into bondage, and who expected their children to die in it. Then came Moses. A man raised in Pharaoh's own household, a man who had walked away from that life, who had spent decades in the desert, who was not looking for a mission when the mission found him. He did not ask for this. He did not feel prepared for it. The book of Exodus records his own protests, his own doubts, his own insistence that someone else would be better suited for what he was being asked to do. But he went back to Egypt, and after 10 plagues, 10 confrontations between the power of Pharaoh and something far older and far greater, Pharaoh finally let the people go. 600,000 men, along with women and children, a vast column of humanity, moving out of Egypt and into the desert, carrying what they could, walking toward a future none of them had ever seen. And then Pharaoh changed his mind. He sent his army after them, 600 chariots, mounted soldiers, the full military force of the most powerful empire on earth at that time, moving fast across the desert, closing the distance. The Israelites reached the sea, and they stopped, water in front of them. The army of Egypt behind them. No way forward, no way back. The people were terrified. The book of Exodus records their words with raw honesty. They cried out. They turned on Moses. They asked why he had brought them out here to die. There was panic. There was despair. There was the specific suffocating fear of people who can see their end coming and cannot stop it. And Moses stood at the water. Pause on that image for a moment. Moses standing at the edge of the sea with an entire nation behind him and an army closing in. This is not a story about a man who had no fear. The book of Exodus does not tell us that Moses was unafraid. It tells us what he said and what he did, despite whatever he was feeling in that moment. He told the people, "Stand still and see what will happen." Those are remarkable words. Stand still. In the face of the most impossible situation imaginable. Stand still. Not because nothing was going to happen, but because something was going to happen that was beyond their ability to force or control. Leadership, at its deepest level, is not the absence of pressure. It is the ability to hold a position under pressure that would cause most people to collapse. It is the capacity to remain present when everything in you is screaming to run. Moses did not know, with certainty, what was about to happen. He had been told. He had been given instructions. He had been assured, but he was still a man standing at the edge of the sea, with hundreds of thousands of people looking to him for something he could not manufacture. He stretched out his hand over the water, and the sea opened. Exodus 14 records that a strong east wind blew through the night, and the waters were divided. The sea floor became dry ground. The people moved forward into the space between the walls of water, onto the path that had appeared, where no path had ever existed. One of the most audacious acts of trust in the entire biblical narrative. A nation walking into the sea. Try to picture what that crossing looked like, not as an illustration in a children's Bible, not as a set piece in a Hollywood film, as a real event happening to real people, parents holding the hands of children too young to understand what they were walking through, old men and women who had been born in slavery and had never expected to see anything but Egypt, now walking through the floor of a sea, people weeping, people praying, people moving fast because they had not forgotten that the Egyptian army was still behind them, and on either side, water, towering walls of it, moving, alive, held in place by something that could not be explained in any human language, the sound alone. The pressure of that much water, suspended, would have produced a sound unlike anything any of them had ever heard. A constant low vibration, the smell of deep ocean, the cold air rising from the exposed sea floor, the strange, surreal quality of sunlight filtering through walls of water on either side. They crossed, all of them. And when the Egyptian army followed, and when Moses stretched out his hand, again from the other shore, the waters returned. The path closed. The sea became the sea again. The Israelites standing on the far shore, watching the sea return. Free. For the first time in 400 years, free. The image has never left human memory. It has been painted, sculpted, filmed, sung about, preached from every pulpit on earth. It appears in the literature of cultures that did not even originate in the biblical tradition, because the image itself, a path appearing through an impossible obstacle at the moment of greatest desperation, speaks to something that is not specific to one people or one time. It speaks to everyone who has ever been trapped. Why does a story from 3,000 years ago still carry the weight that it does? It is not simply because of the scale of the event. History is full of large events. Empires rising, empires falling, battles that changed the course of civilizations. We remember them the way we remember facts, with academic interest, with intellectual respect, and with a certain comfortable distance. The crossing of the Red Sea does not feel distant. It never has. Part of the reason is the human architecture of the story. Moses is not a superhero. He is a man full of doubt, full of reluctance, who keeps going anyway. The Israelites are not noble and serene in their faith. They are terrified. They are angry. They are on the verge of despair. They are, in other words, exactly what human beings look like when they are at the end of their resources. And it is precisely at that point, when the resources run out, when the logic runs out, when the options run out, that the sea opens. This is the architecture of faith that the Bible returns to again and again. Not faith as the absence of fear. Not faith as a kind of spiritual confidence that certain people possess and others do not. Faith as movement forward when movement seems impossible. Faith as the decision to lift your hand over the water even when you cannot see what will happen next. The story carries a message about liberation, not just physical liberation, but the liberation of people from systems designed to convince them that their bondage is permanent, that the way things are is the way things must be, that there is no path forward. It carries a message about leadership, that the leader is not the one who claims to have no fear, but the one who does not allow fear to make the decision. It carries a message about courage, not the courage of people who have nothing to lose, but the courage of people who have everything to lose and move forward anyway. And it carries a message that has outlasted every empire that has ever tried to suppress it. The message that human beings are not meant to live in bondage, and that sometimes the wall of water in front of you is not a barrier. It is a door. Return to the shoreline. Return to the satellite images on every screen on Earth, the helicopters circling overhead, the billions of people watching a live feed of something no model, no algorithm, no government briefing has prepared anyone for. If this happened today, the sea opening, a path appearing through the water, the world would not simply be stunned. It would be permanently changed. Every assumption about the nature of reality, the limits of science, the relationship between the human world and something larger than the human world, all of it would need to be re-examined. It would become the single most referenced event in modern history. And yet, the story has already existed for 3,000 years. It has been carried from one generation to the next in scrolls and codices and printed books and digital text across every continent in hundreds of languages. It has survived the rise and fall of every culture that encountered it. It has been read by kings and by slaves, by philosophers and by farmers, by people in moments of triumph and by people in the deepest darkness of their lives. It has not survived because it is spectacular. It has survived because it is true to something that human beings recognize, even when they cannot fully articulate what that something is. The image of a people standing at the edge of an impossible sea with no way forward and no way back, and then a path. Somewhere in that image, across 3,000 years of distance, something in us knows exactly how they felt standing there, and something in us still hopes that the sea can open.